Chapter 1. Unusual Request. Neoterra was a vibrant planet, a beacon of cooperation between humans and dozens of alien species. It was known for its gleaming cities that sprawled across landmasses, blending human architecture with the designs of civilizations from across the galaxy. Here, humans had established themselves not only as innovators and traders, but also as experts in fields such as physical training and performance enhancement, given their natural resilience and adaptability. Among them, Darius Kane stood out as one of the most renowned trainers in the sector. Darius had made a name for himself by pushing the boundaries of physical conditioning. He worked with both humans and aliens, training them for everything from military service to planetary games that tested endurance, strength, and agility. His classes were always full, attended by a mix of species seeking to enhance their physical prowess, including many Hyxerians, an alien race known for their sleek, tall frames and incredible natural flexibility. But even with their inherent advantages, the Hyxerians were often lacking in proper coordination and physical discipline, traits that made them somewhat clumsy when facing combat challenges. It was after one particularly grueling day in the gym, where Darius had been overseeing a group training session, that he first met Zyias. As he finished wrapping up his last set of instructions and wiped the sweat from his brow, he noticed her standing awkwardly near the exit. She was tall, as all Hyxerians were, her shimmering lavender skin catching the soft, artificial light of the training facility. Her eyes were enormous, glowing faintly like two deep pools of light, and her movements were graceful, albeit tentative. She had been a regular attendee in his group for the past few weeks, and while she showed promise, it was clear to him that she struggled with some of the finer techniques. She approached him hesitantly, her voice soft but determined. "Darius, could I speak to you in private for a moment?" Darius looked up, surprised. He had interacted with her before during training, but this felt more formal, perhaps even personal. He nodded, motioning for her to follow him to the corner of the training hall where it was quieter. "What's on your mind?" he asked, sensing a certain urgency in her tone. Zyias glanced around as if to make sure no one else could hear. "I've been following your classes for a few weeks now, and while I've improved, I'm not where I want to be," she admitted. "The techniques, the movements, I just can't seem to execute them the way you demonstrate." Darius leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "That's not uncommon," he said with a reassuring tone. "You've made significant progress, Zyias. Your form is better than most of your peers, and your endurance has improved too. These things take time." "I know," she interrupted, her large, glowing eyes locking onto his. "But I don't have time. I need to get better quickly. I want to join the Hyxerian Elite Defense Corps. I've been training for years, and I know I have the potential, but I feel like I'm hitting a wall." There was a slight desperation in her voice, one that Darius had heard from many ambitious trainees before. He regarded her thoughtfully. It wasn't uncommon for students to push themselves too hard, too fast, thinking they could shortcut the path to physical mastery. Still, Zyias' tone suggested something deeper in anxiety that went beyond the usual impatience of youth. "You're doing well, but the body can only be pushed so far before it breaks. There's no shame in taking it step by step." Zyias shook her head. "That's just it, Darius. I feel like I'm not progressing because I'm not getting enough personalized attention. I can't compete with the others in these group sessions. I need something more." Darius raised an eyebrow, curious now. "What are you asking exactly?" Zyias hesitated for a moment, her pale lavender skin seeming to flush slightly. "I want private training," she finally said. "At my home. It's quieter there, and I think in a more controlled environment, I can focus better on my technique. I know it's not something you usually offer, but I need this." Private training wasn't something Darius did often, especially not in a client's home. It was an intimate setting, and he preferred the professional distance that the gym provided. But there was a fire in Zyias' eyes, a determination he rarely saw, even in the most driven of his students. It piqued his interest. "You want me to come to your house?" he asked, making sure he understood the request clearly. Zyias nodded quickly. "Yes, it's a bit unconventional, but I think it will help me focus. You've seen how I struggle in class too many distractions, and I don't want to hold anyone back or embarrass myself. Please, Darius." He crossed his arms, weighing the offer. "I'll be honest with you, Zyias. Private sessions aren't usually how I operate, but I can see how serious you are. If you really think this will help you get to where you want to be, then I'm willing to give it a shot. He paused, seeing the hope ignite in her eyes. But understand this: if I agree to this, I expect you to give it everything you've got. No slacking off, no cutting corners. I'll push you harder than I do in the group sessions. Are you ready for that? Zyias straightened, her long limbs tensing as she met his gaze with renewed determination. I'm ready. I'll do whatever it takes. All right, Darius said, nodding. We'll start tomorrow. I'll come by your place in the afternoon. Be ready. Zyias beamed, her alien features softening with relief and excitement. Thank you, Darius. You don't know what this means to me. As she turned to leave, Darius couldn't help but feel a mix of curiosity and caution. He had trained many species over the years, and while Hexerians were known for their physical abilities, they were also notoriously private. Agreeing to train Zyias at her home meant stepping into her world, and he wasn't sure what to expect. But something told him this wasn't just about physical training for her. There was something more at play, and he intended to find out. Darius watched her leave the gym, her tall frame gliding effortlessly through the crowd. As the automatic doors slid shut behind her, he rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Tomorrow would be interesting, and for reasons he couldn't quite yet put into words, Darius felt this was the beginning of something far more significant than a simple workout session. Chapter 2. Alien Training Environment. The next day, Darius found himself walking through a district of Neoterra that was foreign even to him. The neighborhood where Zyias lived was a dense mix of Hexerian architecture, a unique blend of bioluminescent materials and organic designs that seemed to flow with the natural environment. The buildings looked less like constructed structures and more like they had grown from the earth itself, shimmering with soft light that pulsed in rhythm with the native flora. As he made his way through the winding pathways, he couldn't help but feel the slight tension of being in an unfamiliar place. It wasn't his first time working with aliens in close proximity, but Hexerians were known for being an elusive and private species, preferring to keep their homes away from human eyes. Zyias' invitation had been a rare gesture of trust, and he wondered what lay behind it. He finally arrived at her residence, a towering organic structure with large, flowing walls that twisted in ways human architecture never could. The entrance opened with a gentle hum as Zyias herself appeared in the doorway. She looked different today, more at ease, dressed in a form-fitting training outfit made of some sleek, alien material that clung to her lithe form. Her lavender skin seemed to glow faintly under the bioluminescent lights that framed the entrance. "Darius, you made it," she said, smiling warmly as she gestured for him to enter. "Come in. I've set up everything for our session." Stepping inside, Darius found himself in what could only be described as an alien paradise. The interior was spacious, filled with soft, warm light that seemed to radiate from the very walls. The air was rich with a faint floral scent, soothing and calming, and the surfaces all seemed to have a slight organic texture to them, as though the entire house was alive in some way. Zyias led him through a corridor into a vast room, the heart of her personal training area. The space was breathtaking, far larger than he expected, filled with equipment that looked both familiar and strange. It was an intriguing fusion of human gym apparatus and alien tech. There were advanced resistance machines made from materials he couldn't even identify, and platforms that seemed to hover above the ground, likely designed for balance and flexibility training. Soft pads covered the floors, but they weren't like any mats Darius had ever seen. They reacted to touch, shifting and molding around footsteps to provide perfect support. "I designed the room myself," Zyias said, a hint of pride in her voice as she watched his eyes take it all in. "Our bodies are different from yours, but I've always been fascinated by human strength training. That's why I've integrated both Hexerian and human techniques." Darius nodded appreciatively. "You've got quite the setup here. This is more advanced than any gym I've seen, even on Earth." She smiled shyly. "I hope it helps. I've been studying human fitness methods for years, but it's not the equipment that's holding me back. It's my technique. I need to perfect it if I want to be accepted into the elite defense corps." He looked at her, sensing the weight of her ambition. The Hexerian Elite Defense Corps was a prestigious group, and only the best were accepted. For Zyias to even be considered was already an achievement, but he knew the rigorous tests she would face. Her species may have been physically superior in some ways, but the coordination, focus, and precision required for combat training were aspects that took serious dedication. "All right," he said, his voice turning professional. "Let's get started." They began with warm-up exercises, stretching, and light cardio. Darius noted how fluid Zyias' movements were. Her body was clearly built for speed and agility, but there was a lack of precision, a certain awkwardness when it came to more focused movements. He corrected her posture, guiding her through the motions of various strength training techniques, and she responded quickly, absorbing every bit of instruction like a sponge. As the session continued, Zyias pushed herself harder and harder, her alien physiology allowing her to recover faster between sets. Darius was impressed by her determination, but as the hours passed, he could see the strain starting to show in her eyes. She was driving herself too hard. "Slow down," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder as she moved to start another set. "You're going to burn out if you keep going at this pace." Zyias shook her head, breathing heavily but refusing to stop. "I can't. I need to be better. Faster. Stronger. You don't understand, Darius. If I fail the entry test, I won't get another chance. This is everything I've been working for." Darius frowned. He had seen this before: students who pushed themselves beyond their limits, thinking that more effort would always lead to better results. But in his experience, it was balance that led to real improvement. He couldn't let her fall into that trap. "Listen to me," he said, his tone firm but not harsh. "You're strong, Zyias, but strength without control is useless. If you push yourself to exhaustion, you'll lose the technique you're trying to perfect. We're training your mind as much as your body, and that requires patience. Trust me, I've seen people burn out before they even reach their full potential." For a moment, she looked at him with frustration, her large glowing eyes searching his face for understanding. Then, slowly, she nodded. I'm sorry. You're right. I've never been this close to my goal before, and I'm scared of failing." Darius softened, giving her a reassuring smile. "You won't fail, not if you keep this up, but you need to trust the process. Let's call it a day for now. Tomorrow, we'll focus more on your balance and coordination." Zyias hesitated but then sighed, nodding in agreement. "All right. Thank you, Darius. I'll do better tomorrow." As they wrapped up, Darius couldn't help but feel a growing sense of respect for her. Beneath her calm and graceful exterior, Zyias was driven by a fierce determination that few could match. It reminded him of some of the best human athletes he had trained, and he knew that if she kept her focus, she would achieve her goals. As he left her home, the sun setting over the alien horizon, Darius couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a training session. There was something deeper at work between them, a connection he hadn't expected, and though he wasn't sure what it meant yet, he knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning of their journey together. Chapter 3: The Challenge of Intensity. The next day, Darius returned to Zyias' home, prepared for another rigorous training session. He had spent the previous night planning new exercises, focusing on improving Zyias' balance and coordination while managing her intensity. But as he approached her door, something felt different. The air seemed heavier, and when Zyias opened the door, her usually serene expression was tense. "Is everything all right?" Darius asked, noticing the faint worry in her glowing eyes. She hesitated for a moment before stepping aside, letting him in. "It's complicated," she said quietly. "My father is here." Darius blinked in surprise. "Your father?" Zyias nodded, leading him into the living area. "He's an officer in the Hyxerian Elite Defense Corps. He doesn't know about the private training. He believes I should be able to master everything on my own, without external help." Darius frowned, sensing the underlying tension in her words. "And how does he feel about you working with a human trainer?" She gave him a strained smile. "Hyxerians aren't exactly fond of asking for help, especially from humans. He wouldn't understand why I need you." Before Darius could respond, a commanding voice echoed through the room. "Zyias, you didn't tell me you had a guest." A tall figure stepped into the room, towering over Darius. It was clear from the man's imposing build and the way he carried himself that he was a high-ranking officer. His lavender skin was darker than Zyias, and his eyes held a cold, calculating intelligence. This was a man who had seen countless battles, a warrior who had no patience for anything he deemed weak. "Father, this is Darius Kane," Zyias said, her voice a bit too formal. He's helping me improve my technique for the core entry trials. The man's eyes narrowed as he scrutinized Darius. A human trainer? For a Hyxerian candidate? Darius stood his ground, meeting the officer's gaze without flinching. Yes, sir. Zyias has made significant progress since we started. My methods focus on both strength and technique. The officer's lips curled into a slight smirk, but there was no humor in it. Humans are strong. I'll give you that. But our kind doesn't need your methods. We are superior in both body and mind. Darius could feel the man's disdain, but he wasn't here to argue. Your daughter has the potential to be one of the best. My job is to help her reach that. The officer looked to Zyias, his eyes softening just slightly. I raised you to be a warrior, Zyias. A true Hyxerian doesn't need outside help to excel. Zyias' voice was firm but respectful. With all due respect, father, I want to be the best version of myself, and Darius is helping me get there. I know my weaknesses, and I'm working to overcome them. The officer regarded her for a moment, clearly displeased but impressed by her resolve. Very well, he said after a long pause. Show me. Zyias blinked in surprise. Show you? Yes, he said, crossing his arms. Show me what you've learned from this human trainer of yours. Darius exchanged a glance with Zyias, who looked momentarily unsure, but then she nodded, stepping onto the training mat. All right. Darius quickly adjusted to the situation, stepping into his role as her coach. Let's start with what we've been working on: balance and precision. Show him the movement drills we practiced yesterday. Zyias took a deep breath and began the exercises. Her movements were graceful yet strong, each step precise as she shifted her weight seamlessly from one position to the next. Darius watched closely, calling out minor adjustments as she went through the drills. Despite the pressure of her father's intense gaze, she maintained her focus. After several minutes, Zyias finished the sequence, her breathing steady but labored. Darius smiled, impressed by her improvement. Good work, Zyias. Her father, however, remained silent, his expression unreadable. He stepped forward, examining his daughter critically before turning to Darius. You've improved her balance. I'll give you that. But strength is what wins battles, not finesse. Darius shook his head. Strength without control is wasted energy. Zyias needs both. The officer's eyes hardened. Let's see just how much you've improved her. He motioned to one of the resistance machines in the corner. It was designed to test raw physical power, using a combination of gravity fields and kinetic feedback. The machine had been set at a challenging level, one that even a Hyxerian would struggle with. Father, this isn't necessary, Zyias began, but he raised a hand to silence her. I want to see how strong you've become. Prove to me that this human hasn't been wasting your time. Zyias hesitated, looking to Darius. He nodded slightly, giving her a reassuring look. You've got this. She stepped up to the machine, her tall frame tensing as she gripped the handles. The air around her seemed to hum with energy as she activated the machine, the gravity fields intensifying with each passing second. Her muscles strained, her lavender skin gleaming with sweat as she pushed against the overwhelming resistance. For a moment, it seemed like the machine might overpower her, but then something changed. Zyias' breathing became more controlled, and her movements steadied. She began to apply the techniques Darius had taught her, channeling her strength more efficiently. Inch by inch, she pushed the machine's arms back, her face set with determination. Finally, with a grunt of effort, she completed the lift, holding the position for a few seconds before releasing it with a gasp of relief. Her father watched in silence, his expression unreadable. Darius, however, couldn't hide his pride. That was incredible, Zyias. You've really come a long way. Zyias smiled at him, her chest heaving with exertion. Thanks. I couldn't have done it without you. The officer stepped forward, his gaze shifting between his daughter and Darius. You've proven yourself today, Zyias, he said, his tone gruff but not unkind. I can see now that there's value in this. Collaboration. But don't think this makes you ready for the elite corps. There's still much work to be done. Zyias nodded, her eyes bright with determination. I'm ready for whatever comes next. Her father gave a curt nod before turning to Darius. I'll be watching her progress closely, human. Don't let me down. With that, the officer turned and left the room, leaving a tense silence in his wake. Zyias let out a long breath, slumping slightly as the tension drained from her body. "I can't believe that just happened," she said, half laughing, half relieved. Darius chuckled. "You handled it like a pro. I'm impressed." Zyias smiled, her eyes softening as she looked at him. "Thank you, Darius. I couldn't have done any of this without you." As the tension of the moment faded, Darius realized that their bond had grown deeper than just trainer and student. There was a mutual respect and understanding between them, something that went beyond the training mat. But there was still work to be done, and neither of them were ones to back down from a challenge. Chapter 4: Breaking the Limit. The following days were a whirlwind of intense training sessions. Zyias, emboldened by her father's approval and Darius's guidance, threw herself into every drill with a renewed sense of purpose. But as her confidence grew, so did the pressure. Her father's watchful eye lingered over every session, evaluating her progress with an intensity that made both Darius and Zyias feel the weight of every mistake. Darius pushed her, refining her technique and strength, but he knew that Zyias was approaching her limit. Her desire to impress her father and pass the trials was starting to consume her. She was working herself into exhaustion, and while she improved daily, Darius sensed something brewing beneath the surface, a dangerous mix of ambition and fatigue. "Zyias," Darius said after one particularly grueling session, wiping sweat from his brow, "you need to take a day off. Your body needs time to recover." Zyias, panting heavily as she collapsed onto one of the padded mats, shook her head. "I can't afford to slow down, Darius. The entry trials are in less than a week. I have to be ready." "You're already ready," Darius said, his voice firm but caring. "But if you keep pushing like this, you're going to hurt yourself. You're exhausted, and no amount of training will help if you don't let your body rest." She looked up at him, her glowing eyes filled with a mixture of frustration and desperation. "I can't rest, Darius. If I fail, my father will never forgive me. I'll never forgive myself." Darius knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've already made incredible progress. You're stronger, faster, and more focused than you've ever been. But pushing yourself to the point of breaking isn't going to make you better. Trust me, you need to recover if you want to perform at your best." Zyias hesitated, her breath ragged as she considered his words. She knew he was right, but the fear of failure gnawed at her, pushing her to keep going despite the pain. After a long moment, she sighed, nodding reluctantly. "All right, one day. But after that, we go even harder." Darius smiled, standing up and offering her a hand. "Deal." They agreed to take the next day off, and for a moment, Darius thought things would settle down. But fate had other plans. The next morning, Darius received an urgent call from Zyias. Her voice, usually calm and composed, was laced with panic. "Darius, I need you to come over. Something's wrong." His heart raced as he grabbed his gear and rushed to her home. When he arrived, Zyias was sitting on the floor of her training room, clutching her left arm, which was swollen and discolored. Her face was pale, her breathing labored. "What happened?" Darius asked, kneeling beside her, his voice tight with concern. "I thought I could handle it," she stammered, wincing as she tried to move her arm. "I didn't want to waste the day, so I tried to do a light session. But I felt something snap when I lifted the weights. I think I've torn something." Darius cursed under his breath. "I told you to rest, Zyias. You've pushed yourself too far." She bit her lip, tears of frustration welling up in her eyes. "I know. I didn't want to fall behind. Now I've ruined everything." Darius quickly examined her arm, his mind racing as he assessed the damage. It wasn't good. The strain she put on her body had caused a severe muscle tear, and if they didn't get her medical attention soon, it could jeopardize her chances of ever competing in the trials. "We need to get you to a med bay," Darius said firmly, helping her to her feet. "This is serious, Zyias." She shook her head, her voice trembling. "I can't go to the med bay. If my father finds out I hurt myself, he'll pull me from the trials." "I can't, Darius, please. There has to be another way." Darius's heart ached at the desperation in her voice. He knew what this meant to her, but her health was on the line. Still, there was one option, though it was risky. "There's a way," he said slowly, "but it's dangerous. I know a place, an underground clinic, where they specialize in accelerated healing. It's not exactly legal, and the process can be painful, but it might help you recover in time. Zyias' eyes widened. Will it work? I've seen it work, Darius said, but it's a gamble. If something goes wrong, it could make things worse. She took a deep breath, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. But there was no hesitation in her eyes. I'll do it. I don't have a choice. Darius nodded, knowing this was the only path left. He quickly made a call to a contact he had in the city's underworld, arranging for them to meet at the clinic that night. The clinic was located in the shadowy depths of Neoterra's undercity, hidden away from the prying eyes of authorities. It was run by a group of rogue scientists who had once worked in high-level medical research, but had since been driven underground due to the controversial nature of their work. Zyias lay on the operating table, her face pale but resolute as the lead doctor, a grizzled old man with mechanical implants in place of his arms, prepared the equipment. Darius stood by her side, his heart pounding with worry. This is going to hurt, the doctor said bluntly as he connected Zyias to a series of machines. The accelerated healing process is painful, and your body will be put under a lot of stress. Are you sure you want to do this? Zyias clenched her fists, nodding. Do it. The procedure began, and Zyias' body convulsed as the machines pumped a cocktail of healing stimulants into her system. Her muscles twitched violently as the torn fibers began to knit themselves back together at an unnatural speed. Darius watched helplessly, his stomach churning at the sight of her in pain. For hours, the process dragged on, and by the end of it, Zyias was drenched in sweat, her body trembling from the strain. But when it was over, the swelling in her arm had gone down, and the tear had been repaired. The doctor disconnected her from the machines, wiping his brow. She'll need to rest for a day or two, but she should be good as new. Darius let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, relief washing over him. Thank you. Zyias, exhausted but smiling, looked up at him. I told you I'd be ready. Epilogue, A Champion's Path. A week later, Zyias stood at the entrance of the Hyxerian Elite Defense Corps training grounds, her head held high as she prepared to face the trials. Her father watched from the sidelines, his stern expression softened by a hint of pride. Darius stood beside him, arms crossed as he watched Zyias step onto the field. Despite everything, she had made it. And as the first test began, Darius knew that no matter what happened, Zyias had already proven herself a true warrior, one who had faced not just physical trials, but the limits of her own will. As she executed the drills with precision and strength, Darius smiled, knowing that their journey wasn't over, it had only just begun.